My name is Deborah Hendricks, and we are here at the home of Tom and Annie Otto. We are in the atrium in Gainesville, Florida. Today's day is January 16th, 2020. And hello, Tom. Thank you for doing this interview today.
Well, we welcome you to our home. Thanks for coming.
Okay. Well, let's start with some practical matters. First of all, let's get your full name and spell it, please.
Thomas Warren Otto, Thomas, my mother's father's name. Warren, Warren, my father's father's name. And of course, my family name, Otto, Otto.
And is it okay if I call you Thomas or Tom?
Thomas, great.
Thomas. Okay, we'll
Yeah.
call you Thomas. And first of all, Thomas, can you tell us where?
No, just go with Tom. Is
Tom.
fine.
Okay, we'll go with Tom.
Yes.
Well, Tom, where and when were you born?
Wow, a long time ago, August the 21st, 1941, not long before the beginning of World War II for America.
And where were you born?
I was born in Ohio. The hospital was in Barberton, Ohio, but we lived out in the country. Our address was Marshallville. There wasn't a hospital within 20 miles.
So, did you grow up? Was it a rural area?
Grew up on a family farm, 100 acres. We grew corn, oats, wheat, and hay. We had cows, 12 to 20. We had a horse. We had pigs. We had chickens. My mother raised the chickens, took responsibility for them, and she had broilers, so many times she would take 6 or 8 dressed chickens to the store on Friday nights, and she would trade chickens for groceries. That tells you what age that was.
So, were you born at home, or were you born in a hospital?
In a hospital in Barberton.
So you were born in the hospital, okay.
Barberton was the home of O.C. Barber, Ohio Cleveland Barber, who had the Ohio Match Company. And he provided matches around the world. He became a match baron, industrialist. Yes. That's why the town was named that. He built a big mansion, big horse stables, and my mother's father built cement fences for him at one point.
Well, let's talk about your parents and your grandparents. Can you give us your parents' names?
Howard and Lillian Otto, they knew each other as children, and their parents both had grocery stores or general stores. And my mother's father, John OBrien, sold this other store to my dad's parents. And so they knew each other from the time they were children.
And how about your grandparents? Can you tell us anything about can you give us their names?
I really only knew my mother's father for a short time. He he had diabetes, and he would come to the farm and go for a walk, and he'd have to sit on a tree stump or something to get his wind back. Is what I remember. He only lived to be like 67, I think. But and her mother died quite a bit younger. I never knew my mother's mother.
Do you remember his name, your mother's father's name? Do you remember his name?
My mother's father was John OBrien.
Okay.
Yes.
And the last name was
actually, it was Thomas John OBrien. I'm sorry.
O'Brien.
Yes, they were the Irish. And if my mother would ever get upset, my dad would say, "She's getting her Irish up." Because I guess he blamed the Irish for being volatile for some reason. But she was not. She was very sweet. She was very, very kind. She gave herself to her family. She spent herself for her family. She would when we were in school, she would get up by 6 o'clock and start the fire in the furnace so that we as children could get dressed over the register by about 7 o'clock so that we'd have a warm place to get dressed.
So can you describe what the register is?
Oh, the register is where the heat comes up from the furnace down in the basement. Yes, she went down the basement and got the furnace going every day. She'd have our clothes laid out for ready to go to school. I say she'd make our lunches so we could take them to school. Those were primitive days, weren't they? Back in the, I guess you'd say, the 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. Yes. My dad's folks had the store, Otto's General Store, in Barberton. Yes. And they did that a long time. I think they had it more than 35 years there. And you came to get something, get groceries from the store. They would go to whatever shelf it was on. They would pick it up and put it on the counter so it could be rung up on the register. They would go hunt for whatever you asked for. Yes.
Wow. Well, did your mom or your grandmother, did they work in the store at all, or not?
My mom did fill in once in a while, yes. But they had hired help there too. A lady by the name of Mrs. Henry. She was their main employee. And
Well, when you were, did you have any, how about brothers and sisters?
oh yes, I had an older sister, Carol Ann. She always wanted to play school at home. And of course she was the teacher. I was the student. About 4 years after me was Margaret, who came along, and when Margaret was born, my dad thought he needed to make more money or wasn't making enough money on the farm, so he took a job at Babcock Wilcox Boiler Factory. That was in Barberton. And then about 4 years after that, little brother Jimmy came along. And of course, whatever I was doing on the farm, Jimmy wanted to do too. He was my little shadow. And I've told the kids many times that I suppose he was 5 or 6 years old, and I was disking, breaking the ground down in the garden behind the house, and I couldn't keep Jimmy away, so he was standing on the tractor, on the axle, holding on to the fender of the tractor, and there was some rough ground, and he fell forward and fell under the track. His right arm fell under the tractor wheel, and by the time we got clear over him, I got the tractor stopped. Jimmy jumped up, ran bawling to the house, and to my mom to show her what had happened, and she looked his arm over, and the ground was soft where we were working it, and he had just pushed his arm down into the ground, and never even took him to the doctor. His arm was all right. He could throw a football farther than I could when he grew up. But it's just one of those little farm accidents that could have been a lot worse.
I was lucky. Well, let's talk about you growing up now. Did you have a lot of chores on the farm? Does that pretty much occupy your time?
Oh, yes. When everybody felt responsible for taking care of the animals and the crops. And we milked about 10 or 12 cows, sent milk to Borden's in Akron, Ohio. And when my dad went to the factory, I guess that's when sometime, well, it was after Margaret was born, maybe when Jim was born. I had one of the milkings. And since my dad worked first shift sometimes, they'd put him on second shift at the other times. And sometimes he'd get up in the morning and bring the cows in from the woods. And then I'd milk them and he'd go off to work. But it was from my age, I suppose, I was about 11 or 12 because a can of milk weighs 100 pounds. And I couldn't quite get the can of milk into the milk cooler. So he built a winch that I could winch it off the floor and slide it down over top of the milk cooler and drop it down in. But I could handle the bucket of milk all right, but I couldn't handle the 100 pounds of milk that it went into. So I was milking cows at a fairly early age. I suppose I was 11 or 12, something like that.
So did Did you have an automatic? How did they milk it? Was it automatic?
Oh yes, we had
Automatic milkers.
automatic surge automatic milkers. Yes, and they had to be cleaned before and after the milk. We milked, and we had a hot water tank in the milk house that we cleaned up all the milk and all the milkers and all the hoses, and had to hang them up properly, and the milk company had an inspection once in a while to see we were doing it right.
So they would come by and get these containers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yes. Well, then every day of the week, month, and year, we had to get the milk down the end of the lane, which was about 3/4 of a mile. And my dad made a little platform for the back of one of the tractors that I could put the milk on, and we just put it down on the milk stand for the carrier to pick it up and take it on into town. They had to take it every day because you.
So you had how many cows? How many cows?
Just we milked around a dozen.
But it's every day.
Oh yes.
Every day of the year.
Oh yes. Okay. And one of the things that I found most consternating was at this time of year in Ohio, January and February, everything would freeze up. We had our watering trough for the cows, and then we eventually got watering cups for the cows. But those pipes would freeze, and we would get hot water from the milk house and pour on them to thaw them, but sometimes the pipes would even burst, and there'd be no water for the cows. So we had to always keep some water in the watering trough, and then we have to break the ice out of the watering trough to and turn the cows loose to have them drink. That's what we always were afraid of on some of these winter mornings when the temperature would get around 0. You know, and it wasn't a long time in that area, but it was for a couple weeks in January and probably first couple weeks in February.
Well, how does this affect you going to school every day?
We made it.
So, did you have a bus? Did you take a bus? Or
Yes.
Took a bus? Okay.
We had to get back down the lane, change our shoes. We had barn shoes and school shoes. Any kid at school that went to school in his barn shoes, everybody knew it. So we had separate shoes and separate clothes for going to the barn too. We had to change our clothes and our shoes and get down there for the bus. Many times we were running down the lane, the bus was waiting for us down there.
Well, what kind of, I guess, was there different ethnicities and where you grew up, or what kind of people made up your?
It was a lily white school. Yes, and we had a black fellow come to our 6th grade class. His name was Harry Downing, and of course we got a lecture from our principal, who was the sixth grade teacher, told us how we should treat people of other races and never have any incidents. And I don't recall that there ever was an incident. Harry had an older brother, was on the football team, and he was a very good player. So everybody thought the best of him.
So are we talking about like the mid-50s at this point?
Probably so.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, what about, were your schools segregated at all by
No.
that time? No?
No, there was only one color
Okay,
there.
so- okay.
No.
How about,
We didn't know about segregation then. That really came from another part of the country.
well, so did you like school? Did you have any favorite subjects?
I always enjoyed school, yes. But I guess I didn't put my whole heart into it. If I got C's and B's, I thought that was good enough.
How about,
Of course, I didn't do anything at home. I didn't do homework and things like that, you know.
you were doing chores,
Yeah.
a lot of chores. And
Mm-hmm.
so all the kids in your classes, they were all from farm areas as well.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
Yes. It was farm country.
did they take any time off from school, like when the harvest would come, or was that?
Yes. We would in the planting season of the oats and the corn in the early spring. Well, it was April, and even into May. We would sometimes work in the fields. I don't think my parents had me do very much of that. They thought school was important, but when we'd get out there in the spring and drive tractor all day and take our shirts off and prove that we could get a suntan before any of the other kids could get a suntan.
So did you do anything for fun? Did you go swimming, for instance? Was there a place to go swimming, or was it all just chores?
Oh, I think we had lots of fun. The Wyant boys had a farm pond. We had a 4-H club. There were several people in the 4-H club, and they had a farm pond, and I remember having a meeting out there, and I was 12 years old, and I didn't know how to swim. I never swam before. And Bobby Osier and Harlan Wyant said, "You don't know how to swim?" They said, come with us. And they put me in this little rowboat, took me out, and tossed me over the edge. And I swam. Yeah. They taught me how to swim.
Sounds like you taught yourself
Yeah.
how to swim.
Yes. But, I don't know how deep it was, but there were plenty of people around to save me if I didn't swim, but
How about fishing or anything like that?
yes, I went to other boys home. The Topes lived off of Fox Lake, and they were on a creek that had a lot of catfish in it, and we'd catch catfish. And remember one time we fished down. There was a rainy day, and we caught 3 nice catfish, a couple of pounders, I don't know if it was 2 pounds, maybe a pound or a pound and a half. And we took, we had one for Larry and Dale and me, and we went up and showed Mother Helen, and she said, "Boys, you give those fish to Tommy. Let him have those fish." So they were on a stringer, and so I said, "Well, I'll take them home." And I was on a bicycle at the time, and I rode 2 miles home with the fish dangling from my bicycle. Went out to the watering trough for the cows, dumped them in there. All 3 of them lived. All 3 catfish lived after being out of water for, I suppose, 20 minutes. I don't know, 20 minutes or longer. Yeah.
Well, now your parents, did they stress getting a good education and maybe moving off the farm, or did they envision you keeping the farm business, the family farm going?
Well, when I was younger, I think we thought that, but that particular farm was valuable for all of its mineral rights. And when I was in high school, East Ohio Gas Company already had mineral rights, or whatever it was, and they punched a couple of gas wells there. And we were so thrilled at first. It came in at great pressure, but it didn't last very long. And then Ohio Edison was coming through with high tension wires, and my dad wanted them to go to somebody else's farm, but no, they came through. It was 7/10 of a mile that they came across our property. And I think that was at the time I was ready to go to college, and that I think that paid for most of my college. Yes. And then a little bit later, East Ohio Gas Company wanted a gas line, and they came along the western edge of our farm, same length, and of course paid for the right way to do that. And so and then even later, a farm next door was taking gravel out off the land, and they kept wanting to buy our farm, and my dad finally sold it under duress from my mother, right? and so we farmed it about it was more than 25 years, about 30 years, I guess. I tell people we raised more rocks than anything else. It's south of Cleveland, 50 miles, there's still residue from the great the great, what do you call them?
Glaciers?
Glaciers. from the glaciers that formed the Great
Glacial
Lakes.
till.
Yes. And there was a lot of stones this size. I mean, big stones. And even after my dad sold the farm, they took more gravel out of our farm, and they discovered a 4-foot vein of coal down in there, and they took the coal and sold the coal. I don't know how long it was, how much it was, but I say that farm was worth more for the mineral rights than for growing things on.
But had that farm been in your family,
No.
so your father bought it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, my dad bought it.
So you're getting ready to go to college. How do you decide where you're going to college? And
Dave Brand, who was we always said, the other end on our football team. He was he was the best football player on our school, best basketball player. He was the best student. He got all A's. He had a lot of awards. He played left end our senior year. I was the right end. So I guess it was he that maybe called me the other end. Our senior year, he caught 8 touchdown passes, and I managed to get 1. But we were best of friends. We were good friends, and he had always planned to go to College of Worcester, and he applied in the fall, and I forget when he got accepted, and so I was dilly-dallying around, and sometime in the spring I applied, and I did not get accepted. I guess my C's and B's weren't good enough. Well, they weren't, and so I was disappointed, of course, and so my superintendent of schools, who had formerly worked over in Alliance, took me over to Mount Union College, and I got accepted there, and I guess there were a couple other kids from our school that went that way too. Mount Union's a Methodist college, and after 3 years or so, I met Annie there, and so really it was the last half of our senior year that we were seriously interested in each other.
what were you? And Annie, what was her last name at that point? What is
Annie Glassburn. Her father was a Friends pastor at the Alliance First Friends Church, yes. And we went, my friends and I went down there. Well, an important part of that story was that after my sophomore year, between my sophomore year and my junior year, Dave Brand, my best friend in college, were going to work out together. He played football at Worcester, and I was going to play at Mount Union. So we worked out together, and he told me about having faith in Christ. And he showed me verses in the Bible that kind of rocked me a little bit. Verses that said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength." And verses such as "He who is not with me is against me." And then he asked me to read Gospel of John, and then he gave me Billy Graham's book, Peace with God. And just in a short time, I had a transformation in my thinking, in my spirit, in my heart, and I wanted to be a Christian, like Dave was, too. So he really pointed me to the way, and so I got back to Mount Union that next fall, and I was wondering how these guys on the football team were going to understand me trying to be a Christian, and walking down the stairs that first Sunday we were back. Lynn Olin, who's in some of these pictures up here, Lynn Olin said, and he was the nose guard on our football team. I was a lonely end. I didn't know him very well, or I didn't know him at all. He came down the stairs. He said, "Anybody want to go to church with me?" And I said, "Well, there's my answer right there." And so we went to church together. We became fast friends, and found some other fellows as well that had become Christians too. We had a little Bible study group in the dorm. Then we wanted to expand it to the church, and we did, sort of. And Annie came to the church and played piano for us, and and she was pressed for student teaching and things, and she couldn't come all the time, and I was quite upset with her that she didn't come as much as I wanted her to come. Yes. But anyway, that's how that all started. Yes.
So what were you studying in college?
Well, I settled on PE and English. So I had a double major when I got out. Yes.
So you were planning to be one of those PE like coaches and teach English in a school? Is that what happened?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what year did you graduate?
64, honey. 64. Yes.
Okay. And then?
You didn't know there was a 1964, did you?
Okay. Were you able to get a job right out of college, or did you do anything else first?
I applied for 3 places and got hired in 3 places. I had to turn 2 of them down. One of them was my alma mater, high school. I didn't want to go there. It was because my sister was still in school there. And I knew I just didn't want to go. So I took one that had better pay anyway.
So what was going on with you and Annie at this point?
She was teaching in Cleveland, and then she had she had mono over the summer, and then she had to go stay with her parents who had moved out to Marion, Indiana. And so we communicated over 240 miles and visited a few times over those 240 miles, yes. But it stuck, didn't it?
Well, at some point you got married.
Yes.
When did you get married?
It was really a year after we graduated. Yes. Annie came back to our college town, and that's where many of our friends were. We had a big wedding. She had so many friends there. I think there were 600 invitations sent. I don't know how many people came to the wedding, but a lot did. And my high school Latin teacher, English lit, and American lit teacher came to our wedding. And she was the one that after being I was on the honor roll in 8th grade. I took Latin first year of 9th grade, first semester of 9th grade, and Miss Fletcher gave me an F for Latin. Well, I deserved it because I wasn't memorizing those little Moa Masamat, Modus Mamusamat, Amant. I can say it better than that. Amoa Mas Amat. Amamus Amant Amat. Is that right? I don't know. Those were torturous days when we had to learn Latin. Liesl had to learn Latin. Yes.
Yes. So we are now in 1965 or 64?
Yeah, 65 when we got married.
65. And you're teaching, you're both teaching
Yes.
at the same school?
No.
No?
Well, we headed south. We came to St. Petersburg in 65.
My goodness.
And I got a job at Azalea Middle School. It was called junior high at the time. And Annie finally landed at Azalea Elementary in St. Petersburg. And we had a great time, like honeymooning in Florida.
So St. Petersburg in 1965 was a lot different
Yes.
than it is now.
Everybody had a terrazzo floor and jalousie windows, which we did too. and we liked it so much that we took a year in Colorado. And she taught at Palmer Elementary. Palmer, what? Something, Palmer.
In Colorado.
Yes. This is near the Air Force Academy. And I taught English and coached football out there. And I wasn't the head coach. I was on the staff.
And what grade was it? Like the 8th grade or? Ninth?
Yes. 8th grade English, wasn't it?
High school, so maybe 9th or 10th?
Yeah, I had 10th grade class and 9th grade class too out there. Annie taught kindergarten out there.
So,
And then the next year, Annie was going to have a baby, and so we thought we should get back near her folks, and we did. And they were in Marion, Indiana. But it was kind of it wasn't a mistake, but we probably should have done better because her folks didn't stay there in Indiana very long.
well, can I ask you one more thing about St. Petersburg, because you went from the north to the south.
Yes.
Was that anything that stood out as far as differences? And
Not so much, because there were so many winter Floridians in St. Petersburg. And the church that we went to had a lot of Northerners in it. Paul Horton's church, Methodist church, had a lot of Yankees. But I didn't know I was a Yankee until the first church I got, and that was in Wildwood, Florida. Well, I was co-pastor in Bradenton first, but in Wildwood I was on my own. And first funeral I did up there, lady came up to me afterwards and says, "Where was you born?" And I told her, I said, born on a family farm in Northeast Ohio. She said, "I knowed you was a Yankee." And I really didn't know at that time that I was a Yankee till a few people pointed it out to me.
well, I think we skipped a part where somehow you became a minister.
Yes.
How did that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, later at Northeast High in St. Petersburg, I had Fellowship of Christian Athletes Club. Absolutely the best students and best athletes too came to that. It was a wonderful group, and we had a lot of people. I had other coaches involved too. I was lay leader at Christ Methodist Church downtown, where I told you about. I spoke once a month at the Gospel Rescue Mission, where the bums would come off the street for a meal at nighttime, and they had to listen to me speak for half an hour. It was not, I was only once a month. There were others that did a lot more than I ever did. And then I worked Billy Graham West Coast Crusade, where they have counselors. I took the course. It was about a 2-month course, classes to help the people that come forward to receive Christ as Savior. I did that too. And I just was thinking, I have so many more Christian endeavors that I ought to consider that. And when one of our friends at Christ Church, Frances Helen Guest, who just died the other day, she must have been well into her 90s now, but she, her husband, and we were friends, and her husband Tom dropped over on the basketball court. He was refereeing kids on the basketball court, and her life was turned upside down. So she went to Candler School of Theology. She wanted to, and she became pastor in St. Petersburg. But anyway, if she could do that, I thought I should have enough faith to do that too. And so Annie encouraged me. And we sold our house, and we went to Asbury Seminary, which we thought at the time would be the best one, but we transferred to finish up at United Theological Seminary. That was in Dayton, Ohio. And then we came back to Florida. But really, I was that serious about being Christian and helping others live Christian life. You know, teaching God's Word, that we did it. And we dragged 2 little girls through all that too. And it was a great experience. We had, after we got through a year's seminary, our money ran out, so we got appointed to 2 little churches in Kentucky. And when we first came to Shannon, was it the second day? Billy Slick Cropper brought us a goat for the girls, and the goat was the most fun. Girls had a great time with it. They would play with it in the yard. The goat would jump on the swing. Girls would get down on all fours. The goat would jump on their backs. You know, like you see on TV now. There's some kind of goat therapy. I don't know what it is. It's kind of silly, but it was out in the country. Church was a quarter of a mile down the road, and the other church was maybe about 5 miles or 6 miles around the other way. And we thought we had died and gone to heaven because we had an income. Of course, I was studying 4 days a week at the seminary, and 3 days a week I was at home.
So at this point, you have given up your teaching career.
Oh yes.
Okay.
But Annie kept right on out there in the country, and she taught in a place called Maze Lick. It was a place where there was old salt lick, and where they find a lot of dinosaur bones and things. And then she moved into town to Maysville, and she and Liesl went to school in Maysville, and Heidi went with me to seminary, and she was kind of homeschooled there.
So you have 2 daughters at this point. One is Liesl.
Yes.
And the other one is...
We didn't mention them coming along in Indiana. Okay. Both of them came along, yes. Yes.
And the second one is named Heidi?
Heidi. She's the first one
that
came. Liesl's the second one that came, but she's really number 1, she says. She's number 2, but she's really number 1.
Now you know we're recording this. Okay.
That's an inside joke.
Okay.
I would sign my name. I'm number 2, but really number 1.
Mhm.
That was the inside joke in the family.
I
Heidi
see.
was always number 1.
Okay.
But,
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So this is starting your adventures in your ministry, where you get to travel around a lot and you see a lot of things. So
Well, no, well, our service was Central Florida, and we had 5, I guess really 6 churches, counting where I was associate pastor, and through the seminary, when I was still at seminary, they offered a tour. It was a term to India. It was 21 days in India. And Annie arranged, through a friend of her father, for the funds for that. And we had a great time going to India, just 7 of us, I believe, with Professor J.T. Siemens, and he had been a former missionary there. But we went around the perimeter of India, from flying into Delhi, going down to Agra for the Taj, coming back to Delhi, and then getting on a train and going east to Benares, Hindu center, where they put where they cremate a lot of people and put them in the Ganga. They call the Ganges the Ganga. And we saw all that and got across to Calcutta. It's Kolkata now, but Mother Teresa had just received a Nobel Prize in 1979, and so we wanted to tour her facility there too. And Professor Siemens said it's doubtful that we would catch her there, but when we got there, there she was. There she was, and she welcomed us, and she gave us a little tour of the orphanage that she has there. There were people around the orphanage dunking their sheets in a bucket of water and then slamming them on a piece of plywood to wash. And I said, wouldn't you be interested in having some washing machines here? She said no. She said no. She said, if you want to come and help us wash clothing the way we wash clothing, you're welcome to do it. But she said they didn't want washing machines because she knew they would always be breaking down, and they wouldn't have means to fix them or parts to fix them with, and she wasn't interested in that kind of help. And and I, as poor as I was at the time, I had just a few rupees to put into her hand, and she was just so grateful. Every room had a crucifix somewhere in the room, and she would always genuflect when we'd go into the next room, looking at the crucifix. She was always so so humble. And she told us, she says, you tell the pastors and the people in the West, you tell them that we fight abortion with adoption. And we are always ready to preserve a life, you know. And that was one thing she was really serious about. But then she gave us to another sister of charity who took us across the street and went to the home for the dying, and it had signs up that this is Mother Teresa's favorite place, the home for the dying. And it was a barn, I would say a barn. Had big beams, you know, nothing painted in there, but they had like army cots with the people on them, and they would minister to these sick and dying people, and they had and a great number of them recovered, but they'd pick them up off of the street and wipe the maggots off of their wounds. Yes. And of course, one of the things written in her book is that one fellow says, I've lived most of my life like a dog, but now I'm dying like an angel. And her forte is seeing God in the eyes of everybody else, and respecting them and treating them as a godly person. You know, just something that if we could ever capture that on a large scale basis, and we do in certain places at certain times, but just seems like that would be the secret to much better civilization. Yes.
Since I think very few people have been able to speak with such a famous person. Can you describe her for us? How did she
yes. I don't know if she came up. She didn't come up to my shoulder. And of course she had quite an accent, but she speaks English very well. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And they held I'm not sure if it was the banquet for the Nobel Prize, but she was at a big banquet hall being honored, and she was given a plate of food that she could not eat in behalf of the poor, those who had nothing to eat. She couldn't eat that sumptuous meal and not remember those who had little to nothing to eat. Yeah.
Where was this her main, I don't want to say headquarters, but where you were in Calcutta, was that where she, like, her main operation?
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
Okay. And what kind of location was that? I mean, what type of environment?
Well, I don't know. It was a former as I remember, it was a former Hindu center, or I don't know if it was a temple, but it was formerly owned by the Hindus, and it was dilapidated for a while, and she asked to have it, and there was some resistance to her having it, but finally the city or whatever gave it to her. Yeah.
Well, how do you have any other stories about where you did your ministry? I think you mentioned you were in the Bahamas even.
Well, that was in my retirement.
Oh, okay.
In retirement, I'd been to Bahamas a couple of times, hadn't we, honey? But we heard from one of the preachers over there a Macedonian call, which means come and help us, like Paul heard from the Macedonians. And so anyway, we contacted them, and they said, come on, we need you for what is it? Yes.
England?
We need you in Bahamas for, I think it was just 2 months. And so I said, sure. We'd go, and Annie and I went to Eleuthera, the Long Island in the middle of the Bahamas, and we thoroughly enjoyed those people. It was covering 5 settlements. The main one was in Rock Sound, Eleuthera in the middle, and it was, help me with the names of the settlements, honey. Tarpon Bay.
Savannah Sound.
Yes, Savannah Sound.
Rock Sound.
Rock Sound.
Weems Bight.
Weems Bight.
And Deep Creek.
Right, Deep Creek. Yes.
And we suggested the man for the upper 5.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And those poor people down in Deep Creek, they would come to church with no shoes on. They would sing with
Trust and obey.
big voices. You know, they were happy, and we were there for
10 weeks.
Thanksgiving, and they brought out all these vegetables, these guavas, and several things I couldn't identify. Laid them on the altar, but you know, they were thankful too. And that lady made such nice baskets and gave them to us when we left. I felt so guilty taking them, but they were beautiful. Yes. Before that, the United Methodist Church, this was in '96. The United Methodist Church has an exchange program where you can, it's a pulpit exchange where the UK pastor would come and serve in a American pastor.
World Methodist Council.
Yes. It's a program of the World Methodist Council, and vice versa. And we did that twice. And we really got a lot out of that, got a lot of understanding of our Methodist Church roots, and John and Charles Wesley sites in Leicestershire, in Coventry, in Christ Church in London, and what was the name of the church in Bristol, where Charles Wesley served. Charles Wesley supposedly wrote 6,000 hymns. And of course, some of the tunes were pub tunes even, but he wrote Christian words for the songs that people were singing in those days, and a lot of them we have in our Methodist churches today. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to our newborn King. Peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconcile. But so many of them are quite well known. And Annie got to play the harpsichord in Charles Wesley's home, which was in Bristol, and it was not 3 stories. I believe it was 4 stories. He had a 4th story where supposedly he went to be alone to study and to write. But that was in Leicestershire, in the Hinckley area, and we had 12 churches on the circuit, and we got to visit and preach in all those churches, and people were just so welcoming and so kind to us. I'm not sure just why. They all, a lot of them that have money like to come to Florida, like to come to Disney, you know. That seemed, and I took along, out of the stores, I took a container of Tropicana orange juice, and I said, you want to know where I'm from? This is where I'm from where they make the orange juice. And they all laughed and laughed, but that's where we were living in Ellington, which is, Tropicana was just across the river from where we were living at the time.
So can we back up for a second and
Well,
what about all of the towns that you did serve in your ministry?
in England?
During your career.
During your career?
Oh,
Can you
well,
just
I
maybe
said
just
I
a
had these
little-
5 appointments I was associate pastor in Bradenton. That's
Yeah.
where Tropicana's address is.
Now, what about the year? Can you maybe give us a year, or a general year?
That was 85.
Okay.
Boy, when you get old, you can't
Yes.
remember all these numbers. But then we went to Wildwood for 4.5 years. That's just down the road here.
We arrived in Wildwood in '85,
Is that when it was?
so Bradenton would have been the 3 years back.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
82.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we did 2 years in Jasper. And then we went to Middleburg for 3 years.
Is it Jasper, Florida?
Mm-hmm. Middleburg, Florida for 3 years. And then we went to Ellington for 6 years. That's it.
There we heard about segregation.
Oh, yes. Yes. And they have the mile-long orange grove there, right, not too far from the church. And and then from
The
Ellington,
Confederate Memorial.
yeah. I'm trying to say the Gamble plantation, where some of the Confederates held forth during the war between the states, and then.
What took place the last Sunday you were there?
Oh yes, there were some people that didn't like the African Methodist Church singing in our choir loft, which we had the last day there. Some people didn't care for that even. And what year was that, honey?
2000.
Yeah, I guess it was 2000.
And tell her about the call that was made.
I'm sorry?
That if you allowed them to sit in our choir loft.
Oh, well, they were just being old
You would be
prejudice,
killed.
old prejudiced people. No, I didn't think anything of that. But then we went up to Flagler Beach. We were there 5 years. We were there 5 years. And we retired from there through a couple of hurricanes, you know. Got to experience that on Flagler Beach. But it was nice there. It was nice there too.
And so you retired but stayed in Florida.
Yes. Well, we thought we would retire someplace between Liesel and Heidi. And so we chose Wildwood, which was about equidistant between both places. And so we were there 10 years.
Before you say that, could you tell about how in each place you formed that food bank for the county?
Well, we did that in the food bank and the Love Inc., Love Incorporated, Love in the Name of Christ, INC, and that was to prevent people from going to church to try to get food and clothing. We'd have a central disposition place, and we did that. We worked on that in Bradenton, in Wildwood, and
Manatee County.
I guess in Ellington, yes.
Flagler
Yeah, but you know, it's hard to qualify. People really need help, and don't just trade it for a few bucks. And you know, you just try to qualify people for what you give them, without being too harsh. You know. Yes.
Okay.
Did you find any pushback when you tried to get other religions into the ministerial groups?
Oh, I don't want to talk about that. There's always a couple resistors, you know. Always a couple resistors. Difficulties with Hebrews saying prayers, or not being allowed to say their prayers enough. You know, but that's minor. That's not important.
Well, tell me what was important to you about your whole career. Tell me, if you can think about it, what was the most important thing about your career?
What's important is to teach the Word of God and to preach it. You think that people being in church a long time would know it, and they do to a certain extent, but putting Christianity into practice, you know. Philip Yancey wrote a book, The Jesus I Never Knew. So many of us use the Christmas story and the Easter story and really don't focus on the grace and the mercy that we should all be practicing every day. You know, the forgiveness that's necessary to live together in community. And so teaching and reiterating. One fella said, if your congregation doesn't learn something in every sermon you preach, he said, you're failing in your job. You know, you've got to do enough research that you bring light to the scriptures, and not just a feel-good religion all the time.
So do you think that your mission might be to try and make a big difference?
Well, I don't know how big of a difference.
Well, if you don't mind if I interject, I think Dad did a lot of, he had a lot of duties as a pastor, preaching on Sunday and visiting shut-ins and handling the business of the church, but he also did a tremendous amount in trying to model Christian behavior for people in the community. And so one story in particular that I'm thinking of is, if you want to tell it, about the Poe children. And that was a good example of the way you brought people together outside of the church as well. Do you want to tell that one?
Well, we had one poor family that was during the student pastorate that lived on the creek on the way to Maysville, and the kids were just meanest kids. There were, 7 or 8 of them? I don't know how many there were. And you drive around and go past them, they would hold out a rifle or a BB gun or whatever they had, or they just point their finger like I'm gonna shoot you, And so their area flooded a lot, and their house leaked a lot, and we said, well, let's do something for this family. And so I organized a little workforce. Didn't happen like I thought it would, but we had some men from the church come help. I worked on the roof, and before I got shingles on, it seemed to leak more than ever. And Duke Clary came and worked on the roof, and some others came and got their place a little more secure from the weather. And father of that family was a terrific alcoholic. I mean, that's all he did was drink. and the kids worked the tobacco fields, and they were as mean as could be. They were just mad at everybody, it seemed. And we gave them a bunch of clothes. Well, that was when we left, though, wasn't it?
We had to
Cool.
honk the horn for them to come out and get them from the edge of the porch because they
Yeah.
wouldn't come out.
I don't think
Yeah.
their mother was not in the picture. And
Yeah.
if I recall, when you showed up with your crew of people to help, they pointed their weapon at you and said, "Get off my land."
Well, I don't think they did that. They
You just climbed up on the roof.
yeah. Yeah, we just did a little bit like that for
And
him.
after he was shot out behind, the girls started coming to our house and telling what they needed.
Yeah.
They felt they could trust
Yes.
us.
And the father, the terrible alcoholic, was found with his brains blowed out. He was in the outhouse, and the sheriff said he really didn't know whether he did it himself or there was an older boy that might have done it too. But just people that live in hell, that
Sheriff wasn't going to press charges.
need to have somebody care about them. And I don't know really the effect we had on them, but we tried.
And there was somebody like that in every place we lived. That Tom really tried to muster the community to do something other than judge them.
Yeah. And just talking to the police chief down here, I forget, it was under the trees there in Wildwood. He was stopped there and I stopped and we sat on the back end of his truck and talked about faith in Christ and faith in God. And he told somebody later on that he was going to shoot himself. That black fellow that was police chief. But he changed his mind just for having somebody to talk to. Yeah. And the fellow that ran the greenhouse in Ellington, too, his business evidently went pretty sour, and I knew it. He didn't come to our church, but we would stop there occasionally, and I knew he was hurting, and so I just brought him a bag of groceries.
Tell about the man that
But he said that
his house burned down.
he said that he was going to kill himself before somebody showed some interest in him. He
Tell
thought
him about the
he was
man
all
in
alone.
Kentucky that the house burned down and you got down on the floor.
Oh. No, that was a man that was a hired hand. He milked cows. He milked like 60 or 70 cows for this other farmer. He was a hired hand. And he got up one cold morning and made a fire for his family, for his wife and 2 sons. He went out to the barn and milked the cows. And the next thing he knew, his house was on fire. And he lost his family. And so
What happened when you went to
I had the funeral. I don't know who volunteered me for that funeral. I don't know.
the landowner?
I
You
g-
got to the funeral home early like you always did, and
Yeah.
he was down on the floor.
he came in and fell on the floor in front of the casket. So
And what'd you do?
I didn't know what to do, so I just got down on the floor with him, put my arm around him, and prayed some, and
You just sat
Tried
there
to-
with him.
tried to let him know that God was with him, and that his family was with God. But
There were about 80 people standing around that didn't
Yeah.
know what to do.
yeah, they sang some.
Neighbors.
Yeah, they sang some real country songs, didn't they? Yeah.
Mr. Tom, I think you're getting a little, we're taking up a lot of your time here.
Yeah,
Is
that-
there anything you want to add that we didn't talk about?
I can't.
Paul,
I
or-
can't think of anything. We, Annie and I have had a wonderful life together. She has spurred us on to our trips to England, to the Bahamas, to the Dominican Republic, to Mexico, building a clinic and things. And I've enjoyed those excursions. We call them short-term mission projects, you know. I've enjoyed those as much as anything.
In the Holy Land.
Oh, Holy Land twice. Yes. Annie got me off to those places too. That was wonderful. If you ever want to see anything more marvelous, 10 times marvelous, more marvelous than Disney World, go to the Holy Land. It's the Bible come alive. Yes.
It's like a plan.
And your grandchildren.
Well, sure. Sure.
Great.
Liesel has 4.
Okay. Do you want to name your grandchildren, or is that?
Heidi has 4. Liesel's oldest is a stepchild, Olivia, and she lives up in Tyrone, Georgia, and she only has 5 girls herself. But Liesel's children are Katie, who's about 23 now.
24?
24? She has Will, who's about 22, and Casey is about 18, I guess.
He's 17, about to turn 18. A lot of them to keep up with.
Yeah, I can't keep up with them.
Heidi's children,
Heidi has Michael. He's probably 23 or 4.
I think he's
28.
closer to 27, 28.
Really? Okay. And then CJ is in the Navy. He's just 22. Is he 22? And then the 2 kids at home are
Mark,
Mark. He's a junior in high school,
he's got to be close to 18.
close to 18. And little Heidi Rose is a sophomore and a go-getter. She loves to sing and dance. She's in drama, several plays already, and she's on the swim team. And she gets all A's. How disgusting is that? She gets all A's.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Oh yes, and she's president of the sophomore class. Yeah.
And what does the circle, Johnny Cash song, will the circle be unbroken?
Will the circle be unbroken in the sky,
What's your
Lord,
sentiment about that?
by and by? Yes, we believe that the Lord has a place for us after our walk on earth is over. Jesus said, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, would I have told you? I go there to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also. Where I'm going, you know, and the way you know. Well, Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way? Jesus said, I am the way, truth, and the life. And so, you know, I've told that to so many people and told of God's love and eternal care that I don't have any doubts about that myself. We're going to move, but then with this getting turned upside down, I thought I'd hurt my back and went to emergency room, had an MRI and X-rays, and that emergency room doctor, she said, I'm looking at this. She said, this looks like you've got lesions and tumors on your liver. And she said, but we'll have to send you over to the hospital. And that's what they did. But she could see it from the very beginning. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time and all those words of wisdom. And I think we'll stop the interview unless you...
We always enjoy seeing you.
Well, thank you very much.
Deborah.
And at that point, I think we will conclude the interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grace.
No problem.